is Ian Schaefer. I'm one of the product specialists, the senior product specialist here actually at UDA Technologies, and we'll be diving into a few different features here today, covering mostly tools and resources that are going to help us work within OnPlan scheduling. My goal today is to make sure that we cover a lot of the key points like our to-do list, our task list. Everybody has one, and we'll talk about the one in ConstructionSuite as well. The calendar in ConstructionSuite, of course, and how we're going to be populating this with some of the schedules that we've got for the projects. There's also going to be a lot of key content that feeds into this, like the contacts list in ConstructionSuite, some of the insurance information that we've collected for those contacts. And then, of course, once you get to the calendar itself, we'll also talk about how we can adjust the resources that we've assigned and set up some reminders to go out to the people who are going to be involved. Today, of course, wraps up the fourth and final in our series of webinars covering ConstructionSuite and its primary features. But don't forget that tomorrow we're actually going to be diving into ConstructionOnline as well. And this one's going to be fun too, because a lot of the content that we're creating here in ConstructionSuite publishes up to ConstructionOnline seamlessly, and from there it can be shared with everybody that you guys work with who aren't employed by your company. So clients, subcontractors, architects, interior decorators or designers, or just about anybody else under the sun. You can bring all these people in to work with you guys on the projects, and as you do so, ConstructionOnline is the perfect tool. We'll show you how tomorrow as we dive into that starting at 3 o'clock. Now, for now though, we've got a focus today in OnPlan, and let's take a look at a brief recap on what we're going to be looking at and how the information has come together. So for those of you guys who have joined us, you probably recognize this as our Today screen and our primary dashboard here in ConstructionSuite. Of course, as always, we have put together some information to give ourselves a cost breakdown using the various different classifications in the estimate, like materials, labor, subcontractor costs, equipment rental fees, and other costs as well. In addition to that, we have the lead pipeline and change order summary down the left-hand side. This information, of course, we populated mostly through the contacts that we were adding in on Monday. And of course, the change orders are coming along in the estimates that we've got as the primary estimates for the job. We created one yesterday, so the numbers here should be a little bit higher. Also yesterday, we were taking a look at some of the QuickBooks integration, so we went into and adjusted things like our original contract sum, the estimated value, which is the original contract plus or minus any change orders that have cropped up. And then we imported things like actual costs, committed costs, invoiced amounts, and so on to see how we stand on the jobs. But one of the great parts about the scheduling tool that we'll be taking a look at today is this is going to help us do some of the projections for costs through things like cash flow reports and the like. Now, a lot of the tasks and the content for these we didn't cover in too much detail yet, because you'll find most of that happens today as we're going through and creating new meetings and appointments, most of which you'll be able to do here in the calendar section. And this calendar functions a lot like most calendar tools that you guys have probably used in the past. Your Outlook calendars, iClouds, or any kind of iCalendars that you guys might be using. Google's got one as well. A lot of them function in this way where you've got a month view, a week view, a day view. You can even list out all of your tasks and pick a period in time that you want to keep this information together. Or in our case, you've also got a year view, which acts as kind of a heat map for what we're working on throughout the 2015 working year here. The reason I call it a heat map is if you'll look at each of the months that we're looking at here in ConstructionSuite, the dots that show up here on the various different days in the calendar represent tasks that we're working on throughout that period of time. Now, what you'll notice as you're looking through this is some of the dots are, of course, darker than others, and that represents a higher density of responsibility at that time frame. Now, you can see, based on this, that I tend to get a little bit busier around the beginning of the normal football season here. So near the end of July, it starts to pick up through August, September, October, and then it kind of lightens off a little bit in November and December. Brief little spurt through the middle of winter here, and then as we get into spring, April, May, and June, obviously I've got a lighter workload. We can recognize this just by looking at the year view on the calendar, and then if we wanted to get into and start reviewing some of the tasks that I've created for this period in time, you can always just click through to the dates here or step back into the month view and take a look through some of the different tasks and activities and content that we have going on here as well. So the month view shows you the tasks that are going to be filled in from either the lead tracking system that I've got here in ConstructionSuite. You can see lead callbacks and follow-ups in here. It's also going to be scheduled tasks. These you can recognize because they've got the little calendar pull tab looking icon associated with them. There's going to be other things here as well, like meetings or appointments, callbacks, insurance expiration notifications, and things like that as well. Most of these will either be created automatically by the system or by you whenever you double-click on one of the days to create an activity for that day. And there it is. So as you're looking through this information, for a new activity, you can see where there's an area where we can put in a subject line for the meeting. Let's say meeting with client, because this seems to be the hot topic for all of my meetings. Of course, you can choose a type here as well, and these activity types are completely customizable. So if you guys wanted to use the standard set, you certainly can, or you can create a new one just in case you guys wanted to do something like a job site walkthrough or group conversations or something like that as well. So let's see if I can type today. Client walkthrough. There we are. And again, you can set up a lot of this information so that you can pick your time frames for your meetings and appointments, or you can create them as all-day activities. You can pull in the different contacts to carry along with this particular meeting or this appointment, so you can relate contacts or you can assign resources to them. Could be a salesperson or a project manager. And you can also associate these with projects or opportunities that you guys have going. Now, an important side piece to this, of course, is not just setting up the information so that we know who to work with and how we can reach out to them, but also giving ourselves reminders under the Reminders tab. And these reminders are going to give you the ability to send out text message notifications, email notifications, or if we're working here in ConstructionSuite, you can also get a pop-up notification directly through the system. So you'll see the activity or the reminder types over here on the right. And the idea here is, if you're sitting in front of the system, then you'll want to get a pop-up notifying you so far in advance that you've got something to take care of here. Otherwise, if you happen to be out and about, sending yourself an email or a text message tends to be a pretty handy tool. Notifying the people who are going to be joining you for that meeting, also pretty critical. And we can do this if the contact has an email address and a valid mobile number and cell provider in order to pass out that information. So you'll see the information in here. For now, though, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that reminder as we don't need it. Click OK to save that activity onto the calendar. There it is. Now, of course, looking at the calendar itself, you guys might notice that there's a couple of additional aspects to this calendar that we can work with. As an example, some of my tasks are in purple at this point, some of them are in green, others a very light shade of blue, and some a moderately darker shade of blue. This represents the project that most of these calendar events or activities are associated with. And those projects, which you can see under the projects list here in ConstructionSuite, have an option to color code them in the Edit Projects setting. So if you open up one of your projects and you click on the little pencil icon to edit the project, there's going to be a project color down here at the bottom of this Info tab, and you can select from any number of different color codings that you guys would like to use on the calendar. And this just highlights everything for that particular project using that color, so that you can, at a glance, distinguish between all the different jobs and everything like that that you guys have on the calendar here in ConstructionSuite. So this is an easy way to go ahead and color lock everything to give you some kind of easy options to see at a glance what's going on. You can also take this a step further, though, by filtering down to certain projects or project groups, contacts, and contact groups as well. So in this case, if you guys were working in a subdivision, for example, as a custom home builder, you could come into the project groups and then filter the list down to all projects that fit into that subdivision to kind of look through and see what's going to be happening. If you guys are looking for your own staff to see where all of your own just general laborers are going to be at any given point, maybe we could switch over at that point to the contact groups and pick our employees from the list instead and see what they might be doing here as well. Yeah, we've got some stuff going on. But of course, a lot of this information, again, is going to be for all the projects that we have going at any given time. And this is part of the reason why I actually like to have my project names associated with the activities as well. So on here, you can see where I'm going to be picking up or setting up the permits for the Stott residence. And I know this because it says permits-Stott residence. Other activities on here could be associated with other jobs, like here I'm paying the lot costs for the Rogers whole home improvement project. We're buying the lot, knocking down the old house, and we're building a new one actually. So I don't remember why I called it home improvement, but maybe we're using the Tim Taylor approach. But in this case, what we're doing here is we're looking through and setting up the information. So once again, at a glance on the calendar, you can see this information. Differentiate between the different projects that we're working on. You can even double click on any of these activities as well to see all of the additional content, like who might be assigned to the task, which project it's relating to, and some of the duration for the task itself. Now, the extension to the name of the task is one of the options that you guys will have the ability to adjust as you're working through ConstructionSuite. Those of you who are working on a number of different projects, either commercial or residential projects, could be new construction, or could be remodeling or tenant improvement or something like that. You can have it set to display the project name if you'd like. If you have a harder time managing a lot of your own employees, though, it might actually help out to come to the Tools menu. And from this area, you can modify some of the calendar options to display something else in association with this instead, like the contact name. If we set it to use the contact name instead of the project name, then you'll actually start to see where all of your contacts are going to be working, or assigned users if you guys have all of your own internal users set up here as well. Once again, the idea here is, if you've got all of your employees set up as users in ConstructionSuite, and you check the box to use subject-username, you'd be able to look at the calendar and see where everybody's going to be working and what they're going to be getting done at any given point. Same for the contact names. If you guys use a lot of subcontractors and you want to see where the subcontractors are going to be working at any given point, change the activity titles around to be activity name dash resource in this case, and you'll be able to see where all of your subcontractors are working at any given time. So again, the idea here is give yourselves these settings so that you can easily see at a glance who's going to be working on what, when, or where. Now from here, we're looking at a lot of the calendar activities, and commonly the calendar activities are going to be events that happen at a specific time involving a group of people. Sometimes it might just be a single person, but more often than not it's you and a client, or you and a project manager, or your project manager and all the employees, or a foreman or something like that. So if you're trying to align schedules between people, you'll typically find the tasks on the calendar for those. The tasks that don't typically have a specific start date, maybe just a deadline instead, or that just need to act as a reminder for yourself and you've got some period of time to get them done, would be better off showing up here on the to-do list. And this is the one that I kind of made mention of a little bit earlier. Everybody has a to-do list, whether you have it written down or not. There's things that you want to get accomplished, and you usually have some form of a deadline to get these things accomplished. What the to-do list in ConstructionSuite allows you to do is, for one, actually put it into text so that you can see this and get a regular reminder that these things still need to get done. But you can also come up and create these new to-dos, add some descriptive information to them, and then assign them to other people. This is probably my favorite part of the to-do list. I can build a whole lot of tasks that I want to get accomplished over a given period of time, and then assign them out to the guys that I need to get them done, or who I think will actually be able to accomplish these tasks. And then it's basically off of my plate. I can just come back to the to-do list periodically and check in on these tasks, but ultimately, the tasks that I create here in the to-do list will show up for the other ConstructionSuite users in their to-do lists. It will also filter this information down to my projects that we're looking at any given point. You can see the to-dos for the projects. And it'll also take this information and sync it up to ConstructionOnline, where it could then be available through anybody using one of the mobile apps. If you're using on-site to-dos, then anything that I create for you here in ConstructionSuite will sync up to my ConstructionOnline account. We'll share that information over to your account, which will then get pulled down into your mobile app on your phone. So I create it here, it pops up on your phone. When you check it off, it falls off of my list here. And that's part of the idea behind all of the communication and collaborative tools available to you guys through the calendars and through your to-do lists here in ConstructionSuite. Our intent here, or the goal with using these tools, is to get everybody on a unified business platform that's showing us all of the activities and the tasks to accomplish for the company in one central location. And it passes the tools out so that mobility isn't an issue either. You can always pull up the list of things to do from your phones, through the mobile apps, or directly on a website, depending on where you happen to be. This, again, though, works for the company as a whole, so let's take a step into one of these projects and look at some of the options that we have for mapping out the schedule for just this project instead of for everything for the company. Now, to do this, we've got a couple of different options. As we looked at on Tuesday, as we dove into the estimating webinar, we've got a section over on the left-hand side, the navigation panel, which will allow you to create and modify a good number of templates in ConstructionSuite. These templates are going to be available for scheduling as well, so if you click on the Scheduling tab, in the bottom right corner you'll see a few different templates for us to work with. These templates would include things like a commercial master scheduling template. We've got a light commercial template, a remodeling, and a residential template as well. There's also a sample just in case you guys want to open it up and see how things link together. But if you'd like to open up and just preview one of the templates, you can always right-click on one of these master templates and select Edit to just make some adjustments to the template itself. In this case, the template will open up for me in OnPlan, which is ConstructionSuite's built-in Gantt chart scheduling software. And from here, you guys will see a couple of key points. We've got on the left-hand side the task information for what we're working on. In this template, the structure for the task information is going to be a group planning, which is highlighted in this blue row. And underneath it, you'll find all the tasks like design services, permits, lot costs, and construction financing as well. So we've got 4 tasks all set up as part of this group planning. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see the Gantt chart, where you get a visual representation about this. Task design services shows up as a little block on the Gantt chart. Under the group, which is the braced, planning. Now as you go through and you make some adjustments to these tasks, since they're all associated with a planning group, the group start dates and end dates will be adjusted based on the start dates and end dates of the tasks within it. So if we decided to say design services begins on, it looks like this is the 3rd of January 2011, we could extend this out a couple of days, and now planning will be a little bit larger as well. Same thing for permits. We could come in here and say that this is actually a 4-day task, and maybe we want to push this back a couple of days as well. So I'm going to go from the 3rd to the 5th. Now what this is going to do, oh, didn't create the relationship. Yeah, there we go. What this is going to do, of course, is it's going to continue to stretch out this group, because the group is encompassing all the tasks within it, and the earliest start date is the 3rd, the latest end date is the 10th, so the group spans from the 3rd to the 10th. And you'll see that here. You'll also notice that the total duration for all the tasks within the group is going to be 6 days. And if there's any kind of overlap or anything like that, as you'll see down here with design services, lot costs, and construction financing, the overlap is ignored as well, because this is all happening at the same time, so it doesn't extend out this group any further. Now this, of course, is making changes over on the task information side. If you click onto the task that you're going to adjust, you can make changes to the task name. We can go from design services to just designs, perhaps. You'll also be able to adjust start dates by clicking into and either typing in a new date or clicking in the drop-down to adjust the date that it begins. End dates as well, same concept. You can just change the dates here and everything like that. And the duration. Durations are typically going to be the number of days that you guys are going to be working with in this case. Now the next column over is actually how you build some of the relationships between these tasks as well. And these relationships are going to be built using the predecessors column in this case. Now predecessor relationships are like in some of the older programs like projects, these would typically be referred to as dependencies or just relationships. And the idea for these is that you're linking 2 tasks together. Right now I'm going to be entering in a predecessor for permits, and the predecessor is going to be the task that has to be done ultimately before permits begins. And that's the relationship type that we're creating here. In this case, the one that I'm going to use is going to be designs, and designs is going to be task ID 2, and so that's the number that I'm going to use for my predecessor. Predecessor will be task ID 2. And now over on the Gantt chart, you'll actually see this represented as an arrow connecting these 2 tasks. Predecessor relationship is the connection that I have built here, And as you go and build in more predecessor relationships, you'll see more of the arrows popping up on the tasks, or rather, over on the Gantt chart. So we'll say 3, and then 4, and so on down. You can see how the tasks are starting to chain together over on the right-hand side. And if you ever have two tasks that need to start at the same time, you can actually represent this still with predecessor relationships, and in this case, you'll just be doing a start-to-start relationship. So rather than having it go from the finish of task 7 to the start of this task 8, I'm going to set workman's comp to just have the same start date as 8, and that can be done by putting in the task ID, and then representing the start-to-start relationship with SS. SS means start to start. You can do the same thing to make two tasks finish at the same time, and that would be FF, or finish to finish. Now you might notice, as we're putting together these predecessor relationships, that some of these relationships are represented in red, others are represented in gray over on the Gantt chart. And this is actually a really important point too, because the red arrows, or the red predecessor relationships, are going to represent all of the tasks that actually fit on the critical path. So as you're mapping out your project, the system is automatically going to try to find the shortest number of tasks to go from the beginning of the schedule to the end of the schedule, and that's going to become your critical path. A delay to any one of the tasks on the Gantt chart, or in this schedule as a whole, will cause a delay to the project as a whole, and you'll start to see that as you map out all the different tasks. So some of these will show up with gray relationships because they're not critical path tasks. Others will show with red because they are. So let's see, where were we? We were working on some of these, tying some of these tasks together. And one of the things that you might notice as well as you guys are going through this, I'm doing most of my work right now over on the left-hand side by plugging in predecessors and durations and things like that. But there's nothing to say that you can't do similar things over here on the right-hand side as well, except in this case, most of it's going to be done by dragging and dropping tasks around. So here we can drag out the project phone to install that, and that's going to happen shortly after Builder's Risk Insurance. And this pop-up message that I keep getting as we drag these tasks around is just asking me if I think that there should be a connection between these two tasks, since I have dropped it immediately following one of those. So in this case, my options are yes, and it will add that predecessor relationship, or no, and it'll just drop the task at that date. No relationships to anything else. Either option is fine, and you'll see these things start to build out as we go. You can also use this dragging and dropping or the Gantt chart manipulation to extend out some of your tasks as well, just in case you would like. So also a pretty easy process here as well. Now we do have a question that's come in. It looks like one of the viewers has caught that some of the dates on here are a little bit odd perhaps. On the Gantt chart, some of these days are actually getting skipped. Like on this case, January 17th, this Monday, got skipped over when I created the relationship here between performance bond and project insurance. Now that's because on this particular schedule, I've apparently represented Monday the 17th as a holiday. And you'll actually be able to go in and take a look at the holidays that are being used on this particular schedule if you go up to the Options menu and take a look at the Workdays and Holidays section here as well. Now on this particular page, you've got several different options to choose from for default settings, and they depend primarily on the location of the company that you put in when you were setting up the initial configuration. So as you're setting this information up, you'll see that we've got the weekdays that we typically work over here on the left-hand side. My work week is Monday through Friday. And then the holidays that we want to observe as a company are going to be here on the right. So for the US holidays, mine is a US-based company in this case, you can see that we're observing things like New Year's Day and MLK and President's Day and everything like that. If you were in Australia, there's going to be a different set of holidays here, same with Canada. Some additional things in here like Canada Day and the like. Now, of course, these are a lot of default holidays, just the standard stuff that you guys are looking at. But sometimes you guys might observe holidays that aren't standard. Maybe I recently went to work with some clients up in New York City, and the vast majority of their clients at the time were Jewish, and therefore, as a company, they were observing Jewish holidays as well. So for something like that, you could just come over to the Exceptions tab and add in additional non-working days to the calendar so that it will automatically skip some of these days and readjust our time frames to fit these new holidays that we're adding in. So if we were to do something like that, in this case for January 18th, 2011, that's going to be 1/18/2011. You'll see that it actually goes through and pushes out a lot of the tasks to fit with these new holidays. And you can do the same thing in reverse. If you ever go in there and add exceptions as additional working days, you can actually compress down the schedule and get the job done a little bit faster. In this case, if you've done something like maybe we're starting to get close to the end of the project and right now it looks like you're going to be 3 or 4 days behind, so you decide that you want to squeeze in a few extra Saturdays and Sundays just to get it done on time, you could do that. You could go into the settings for the schedule, adjust the working days, and just add in a few Saturdays and Sundays to hopefully finish the job on time. So you'll see that sort of thing happening, and as soon as you adjust those working days or non-working days, the schedule automatically prompts you to say, we want to start, or do you want to compress the schedule to reflect these adjustments to your working days? So if you say yes, it will actually squeeze out any of that extra time that might show up. Now most of that extra time is going to be determined as you guys are setting up all of these predecessor relationships, and as long as you have tasks related to one another, the extra time is typically going to get pushed out as needed whenever you compress. Now this extra time might take on the approach of, or you might see this showing up as you start to adjust time frames for some of the tasks, or if you decide to drag them around a little bit on the Gantt chart, you'll start to see breaks and additional wasted time in here that might not need to show up. If something like that ever happens, you can actually come up to the Tools menu in ConstructionSuite and use the Compress Schedule option to squeeze out a lot of this extra time based on some of the work or adjustments that you guys are doing using predecessor relationships and start dates. So again, if you go through and you do that, compressing the schedule will just remove some of this extra time that will be showing up. You can also do similar things if you go through and use a feature in ConstructionSuite called ASAP. Now, by default, the tasks that you're working with in the schedule will always move back in the schedule, not back in time, but like further away from today's date, if you extend one of these tasks out, and all of our subsequent tasks, the following tasks, would be delayed as a result. So if we were to do that, move construction utilities back a week and a half, you'll notice that the portable restrooms scoot back and the signage scoots back. Let me zoom out just a little bit so that we can see that a little easier. So these two tasks are being pushed back because its predecessor is being pushed back as well. The same does not happen, though, if you move this task earlier in the schedule. Those two tasks are still going to be out there at the date that they were set to not too long ago, and this is primarily because as you're setting the schedule, the relationship types that we're looking at are soft predecessors, meaning they're guidelines for an earliest possible start date, but it doesn't force it to start at that earliest possible date. It just gives it the option to start then or any time after. If you'd like to change that, this is where the ASAP feature actually comes into play. ASAP means that the predecessors are going to be shifted from soft predecessors to hard predecessors, and every task is going to finish, as you could guess, as soon as possible. So here there's an option under the Tools menu to mark all tasks as ASAP, and this means that if you push all the tasks back, can't do it now because it's an ASAP task. We could do it for Project Phone though, which has no predecessors, so if we push this one back, all of the following tasks are going to get delayed. If we move it to its original date though, they're always just going to follow along with that. So back to their original dates they go. So again, that's going to be the ASAP feature, and under the Tools menu, you can mark all of your tasks as ASAP if you prefer hard predecessor relationships. Or if you just need it to happen as a one-time action, you can compress the schedule to squeeze out a lot of the extra time. You can also right-click on any task and go to the task information and set the ASAP feature right here as well. That's going to be part of the task information. And the task information section that we're looking at right now is going to include a lot of the information that you would see on the task information section of the schedule over here. So you'll have the option to go in and adjust things like your start dates and your end dates, your durations, and things like that. Now, of course, most of this information that we're looking at right now would be setting it up within the schedules templates. As you're building scheduling templates, you can go through and map out the relationships between your tasks. You can set the ASAP features so that you can always set your start dates and everything like that. And what we're really doing right now is building relationships between tasks throughout the schedule, knowing full well that something like demolition has to be done before you guys start pouring the foundation. You got to make sure that everything else is removed before you try to pour in the new foundation for the new building that we're going to be putting in. So with that being the case, as you start to get down here, you can start to create these predecessor relationships, doing things like after the demolition labor is complete, maybe it's typically about a 2-week-long process, then we can do the footers for this particular section. So we can start doing some of the site work after demolition labor, so that's 19. Then we can start to do the footers labor after the site work is complete, so that's 20. Footers materials might happen around the same time as footers labor, so that's going to be 24, start to start relationship. Footers inspection, once we're done, that's going to happen afterwards. So again, task 24 is my predecessor. And then we move into foundation labor and things like that as well. So this just starts to map out how I want all of my tasks to kind of flow together. And then we start to get down into some of the additional information and the additional work that we're going to be doing here for framing. Now, one of the important points to make here, though, is that once we put in the concrete slab, if this is going to be a poured slab that we're putting in, concrete always takes a little bit of time to set before we can actually finish moving on to the next task. So I'm not going to do all of my framing until the foundation has set for this particular project. And to make sure that that's the case, you'll usually want to put in a lead time or a lag time, which is going to be represented here in the schedule using plus or minus so many days after the predecessor relationship. So in this case, if we were going to say the inspection has to happen and then we're going to give it a few days before we do any miscellaneous foundation work, probably cleanup and the like, then we would say that 32 is my predecessor for foundation miscellaneous, but I'm going to give it 3 days to set. And this, as I mentioned, is just going to build in some additional time to allow the foundation, in this case, to set before we move on to the next task. The next task in this case, or the next group of tasks, would be framing. So in this case now we've got all of this information available for framing, and I know by default framing is typically going to follow along with foundation, and it's going to happen after all the miscellaneous content is done. So again, same as before, my framing labor task is going to follow foundation miscellaneous, so its predecessor is going to be 33. Now in this case we're going to start to get into things like floor systems and wall framing materials and all these different things. The labor for these is going to be kind of all over the place, but a lot of it can actually overlap. And this is typically where you'll start to have things happening like you could put in a lead time, minus 1 day, meaning that it's going to overlap a little bit on the other task. So a framing labor is actually a 10-day task. Maybe I'll start with the floor systems the day before I'm finished with all the framing labor. I know that might not make too much sense there, but this just gives you the ability to go through and build in a little bit of overlap onto your tasks as well. So you can kind of position your tasks a little bit more with some of this additional information here as well. Same can be held true if you guys have multiple dependencies or multiple predecessors. In this case, rather than doing plus or minus for the lead times and the lag times, we're just going to separate out our predecessors using commas. So in this case, I'm going to say that for my ceiling, the framing has to be done, and the floor systems have to be done, and the wall systems have to be done as well. And you'll actually see several different things connecting into this one. That just gives us some early start dates for some of these tasks as well. So again, you'll start to see how these things kind of chain together to make one complete picture, and then once this is finished, you can always save this, and it will become available to you guys as a template moving forward. So let's see, a couple of questions then that we have here. just taking a look at some of the color coding on the schedule, one of the viewers asked if we can change some of the colors available on the Gantt chart. And to answer the question, yes, absolutely. And there's two ways to do so. This color coding that we have by default with the solid blue bars representing the tasks, the color coding on these can be changed for everything in the schedule if you just come under the project menu and select one of the other Gantt chart styles, like blue perhaps, or green. This will allow you to change the color coding as a whole for both the tasks and milestones, which are represented typically as 0-day tasks. Like this slab inspection, for example, we can make this a 0-day task to turn it into a milestone, and they'll start to appear as such. Same thing here, 0 days to make it a milestone. Footers inspection is also going to be 0 days for a milestone. And you'll start to see that it's going to be squeezing out some of that extra time again as we go, because all of my tasks are now ASAP tasks. So again, everything is moving along at a good solid pace, a solid clip, and we've color-coded some of the tasks as a whole to make it a little bit easier to see perhaps. Maybe the contrast on the screen isn't the best. To take this a step further though, some of these tasks might be extremely critical and you want to do something to really make that task pop off of the screen sometimes. And to do this, I'd recommend going back into that task information section. So once again, right-click on the task that you want to change, select task information from the right-click menu, and you'll see the color up here in the top right corner. So you can change the color for the task to represent something of a little bit more importance, perhaps, something that needs some extra attention as we're moving through the system. So something like that is pretty easy to work with as well. There's another question here regarding the formatting of the tasks. It looks like how do you establish a category in bold and then a subcategory in a lighter font. And this is actually going to happen by default. The categories that we're working on, or the groups, are always going to show up with bold text and typically highlighted like this in a very light blue row to represent that this is actually a group and doesn't have the information available to it on its own. You'll actually see this happening as well if you ever go in and insert additional groups or subgroups, which you can do through the right-click menu again. There's an option down here to, where do we put it? There it is. There's an option here to add a new group right here in the middle, and the formatting for that line is just going to happen automatically. The row is automatically going to be highlighted in blue. The font is going to become bold automatically as well. But it's not going to have a start date and an end date yet because this group has no tasks of its own. It's just a subgroup under Foundation. So if we wanted to come in here and add tasks, there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. Once again, if you would like, you can go into the right-click menu and there's an option to add a task. And in this case, you can put in some of the additional information for it. If you right-click on the group though, it should allow me to add the task in. There you go, to the group directly. So again, right-click on a group and you can add tasks into that group, or just right-click elsewhere and you can just add a rogue task. And if you do add a rogue task, you can actually reposition it either by cutting, copying, and pasting that task around a little bit, or you can move the tasks up and down through the right-click menu and then indent and outdent them through the different groups that we have available in the system. So there previously, we've got some of these tasks that are a part of the foundation, and we've got foundation labor and materials and inspection. If we wanted to put these into a subgroup, I could move the foundation labor down and then indent it into that group just to make it a part of the whole. And again, it just makes it a little bit easier to navigate around and to work with. Now you might notice that the dates on these have changed pretty substantially. One of the tasks that I have in here is starting on the 5th of January 2011. The new task that I created in a blank group, though, created this task starting at today's date. And that's just because if it doesn't have a guideline to use as you're creating new tasks, it does default to today. And to adjust this, to fix this, I'm probably going to want to just come into this and set it to the same date as most of the rest of the schedule template. This way I don't have one rogue task that starts way off in the future and then everything else kind of just falling in line somewhere in the middle. Now the reason I group all of my dates together like this, even though I know that it's 2011 and we've been so far from 2011 for, well, I mean it's years and years at this point, I keep all of this information because whenever we use this template to create a new schedule, the first thing that's going to happen is the schedule is going to shift the start date to today's date. And you can actually do this right now in the schedule. If you come back up to the Projects tab and shift your project start date, you'll have some options on here on where to shift it. So if we were to come in here and just set a new date, I could put it to today. And now everything is a little bit more normal. What we're looking at now is something that could be started today, and you'll see how the relationships might key in together and everything like that as well. So of course this is all part of the template, and my primary focus in setting up my schedule templates like this is to go ahead and map out all the tasks that I might need on this remodeling project, or a typical remodeling project, and then relate the tasks together using the predecessors so that I don't have to go in there and adjust these things every single time. My ideal for these templates is to have all the groups and tasks that I would need, all the predecessor relationships connecting them together, and that way all I have to do is go in and put into the schedule how long it's going to take each of these tasks for every new remodeling project that I work on moving forward. So at this point we've made some adjustments, and we'll want to save this schedule. And that's going to be available now whenever I use the remodeling master as my template on a job. So now, let's step back into the project that we were working on yesterday and the day before. And this was the booth residence with my colleague, Kyle. So the booth residence has an estimate, and it's going to be available here. We've got some additional files that we've been building up, change orders, contracts, proposals, things like that. But the big question is, how do we get that schedule into this particular project, or any schedule for that matter? And there's a couple of different options that you guys will actually have for pulling them in. We were just taking a look at building a scheduling template. Oh, where do we go? We were just taking a look at building the options for a scheduling template. And if you wanted to use that template for the job, you can actually get into the schedule wizard just by coming to the schedule information section of the project and clicking the link to create a schedule. This is going to open up the wizard, which will allow me to go through and pick from one of a number of different predefined scheduling templates if we wanted to. And if we're using one of those templates, then one of the templates that I might select would be that remodeling master that we just touched on, just in case I want to use this as my structure for this job moving forward. So if we were to do that, then we could go through and select the remodeling master, click next, verify the details for the project, and click next, and verify our holidays and our work week, and then click finish to use that template. So that's certainly an option, and getting into the scheduling window is a great way to pull from a predefined structure. But there's also an option to create new schedules directly from the estimate that you might be working on at any given time as well. So if you go through and you start to build up one of the estimates here in ConstructionSuite, and you put in all your pricing information and everything like that, and you even go through and assign some resources, as we did on Tuesday, or in the estimating webinar, what you'll see here is a complete picture price-wise for how this job is going to look moving forward. Now we just need to set up the date ranges for it, and you'll have those options when you create a new schedule here under the File menu, and use the estimate as our framework for giving us that new schedule. If you select this option, there's going to be some additional choices to make underneath this, such as choosing a specific classification when you're building this. If you just wanted to pull all of your labor or your subcontractor costs or something like that into the schedule, you could. You can include all of your individual estimate line items when you're building a schedule. Just like as we mentioned with QuickBooks integration, this one's fairly unusual because you don't need to see how many nails or when you're going to be using those nails on the job, so it's not as common to include the items. But you could still do some of these other things, like including subcategories that have no estimated value. Maybe you have a sneaking suspicion that they might work their way into the job anyway, so you just want to include them to make sure that there's a placeholder for them. Or perhaps using the option to prorate your company overhead margin into the schedule, including into allowances perhaps. Now I almost always use this option whenever I'm creating the schedule, because creating a schedule from an estimate is going to take all the categories like planning and foundation and use those as groups in the schedule. It'll take all my subcategories, which it will use as tasks. All of these become the tasks in the schedule. And it will take some of the pricing information and resources and things like that as well, and attach those to the tasks here in the new schedule. So in this case, you can see that we've got a new schedule available to me here. And it's brought in all of my groups like planning and foundation and framing, and all the tasks like design services, permits, lot costs, and construction financing. And over on the right-hand side, you can see the total that will be brought in for that task, in my case, perhaps upon completion. So at this point, all we would need to do is just go through and link these tasks together and set the durations for them, and then save as we go. You'll notice that it did, again, default to today as the start date for the project, but if we're not going to begin this one until August 31st, step one for me would be to go to the Projects tab and shift the project start date to August 31st, as that's going to be my baseline. From here, we can go through and again start mapping out our predecessor relationships. Permits come after design services, so there we go. It's task ID 2, not 3. Then I'll pay for the lot costs after the permits, and then we'll do construction financing at the same time as lot costs. So that's going to be a start-to-start relationship. And you'll see these things tying together. Now I know that my architect typically takes about 4 days to complete the designs, so we'll do that. Permits for the City of Auburn, we'll say that it takes 5 days to complete the permit application and to actually receive those permits. For lot costs, I can pay that in a day, sure. And for financing, it usually takes the bank 7 days, we'll say. And this starts to get everything mapped out. And then once we get financing, we can start the job. So footers would be next. Footers being the first task, this is going to come after my construction financing. And then the materials I want to order around the same time, so we'll say 8 start-to-start relationship. And again, in this case, sorry, it should be 7 start-to-start. I've done it again. In this case, I'm using a start-to-start relationship instead of just giving them the same predecessors, because should something happen and the predecessor relationship here breaks between footers and construction financing, I still need to have the footers materials delivered to the job site as soon as I'm beginning the labor for them. So they really need to move around together, and this is the easiest way to make sure that they always stay together, regardless of what happens to its predecessor task. So a delay to footer's labor because maybe the subcontractor can't get out there at the right time doesn't mean that the whole schedule is going to fall apart by me breaking that up. And it also doesn't mean that my footer's materials are going to show up several days before and just sit on the job site, waiting to be picked up by, some local kid or something like that. So again, it's just a little bit safer in my case to keep the two tasks tied to one another rather than giving them the same predecessor, which may not actually be the valid relationship in this case. So keep that in mind as you're building. So again, this is going to be how you're going through and you're mapping out all your tasks. You can add in additional predecessor relationships or additional links between tasks. You'll also notice that there's going to be some icons occasionally popping up over here on the left-hand side, and these icons could represent a number of different things. Again, under the Tools menu, if you mark all your tasks as ASAP, the little arrow pointing to the left is the icon that represents that these tasks are all ASAP tasks. If you guys decide to put in some notes for the tasks, which you can do through the right-click menu and go to Task Notes, example note, you'll get an icon there representing notes. There's also some additional things that you can set for these as well. If you go into the right-click menu and go back into Task Information, you can change some of the things like the status for the task or the priority for the task. If it's a high priority task and it needs a lot of attention, you can add those in and they will create icons for them as well. You'll also start to notice icons if you guys ever go through and start creating artificial resource conflicts or anything like that. So if we were to go into one of these tasks and set a resource through the right-click menu and add in somebody like Abernathy Brothers, then they're going to be booked for that particular day, and you'll actually see an icon for that here as well. Now, one of the other things that you're looking at here in the Select Resource screen is their availability. We've got obviously the area where you can go in and select who you would like to work with on the job. But in the bottom right-hand corner, it shows what they're going to be working on for you over the course of the 2-month window here. And the dates where they're already booked for something with you are going to show up in red. So the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th already booked. This task should be starting on the 31st, so we're okay here. And then we've got a little bit of stuff going on starting on the 8th of September, so it makes it a little bit tougher to work with. Now again, on the 31st, I know I'm actually in the clear because there's the date itself isn't in red, and there's nothing showing up here at the top for activities on this particular date. If we were to try to shift it around a little bit and select one of the dates where they're actually working, you can see what they're working on and the job that's associated with it. So you'll know when you're starting to overbook somebody, or if you're trying to use and abuse them a little bit too much, or what have you. But in this case, again, we're looking at the 31st, so we're okay. At this point, since I'm trying to set the resource for them, I would just click OK to assign them to the task. And from here, ConstructionSuite will usually check to make sure that they have valid insurance information and things like workman's comp and liability and everything like that as well. Now, if it finds valid information for the time period that we're trying to schedule, everything's good. You don't get any pop-ups, there's no notifications, no points of concern. We're in great shape. If, on the other hand, the system recognizes that we don't have valid insurance information, you'll get a pop-up notification saying that it might not be the best idea to use this individual because they're not covered, and if you get hit with an insurance audit, then you're going to have to pay the fine on that one, and they're just going to collect payment on their own, or what have you. So, at this point, if you guys are using the Premier and Catalyst versions of ConstructionSuite and above, and you have access to that inventory, or not the inventory, you have access to the certificate tracking feature, which is available in those two products and above, then you'll catch those notifications here, and they'll help you guys avoid any kind of audits or anything like that. So let's see. So we've got Abernathy Brothers applied to the foundation labor. If we decided to add them into other areas as well, this is where we can start to create the resource conflicts. And there it is. We've got a scheduling conflict. It says that they're already scheduled in that time frame. Are you sure you want to do this? I'm going to say yes. And now we've got an icon representing a schedule conflict as well, a resource conflict. And it also highlights these as tasks that require our attention, because the system isn't sure that Abernathy Brothers is going to be able to do two things at once. Perhaps it's just the two guys, the two brothers, and it takes both of them to work on any individual task, so they can't do the labor while delivering the materials. It just doesn't make any sense, so we have this conflict. Now it's pretty easy to resolve if you guys go through and you finish building out the schedule and you clear up any of those resource conflicts. Obviously the system will catch that and respond in kind right away. But just in case it's spanning multiple projects and you guys don't know exactly what it is at any given time, you can actually come into the schedule. Let's save it into the project first. But under the Reports tab, you can generate a schedule conflict report. There it is, right there in the middle of the page. Scheduling conflict report. And this is actually going to go through all the resources that we have in this schedule and just make sure that they're not scheduled on other projects. And if they are, it'll pull that out and it'll show you in this report where they're scheduled and what task is the conflict and how to get around these conflicts. So it gives you a little bit more information to work with there. And it's all based on setting resources here in the schedule. Now, in addition to that, you can also generate some additional reports like the work order. And the work order is one that can filter down to a specific resource, in this case like Abernathy Brothers. And you can also pick things like a date range for the report or classifications or anything like that. And when you generate, it will spit out a report somewhat like this, just outlining what they're doing and how long they have to get it done. So there's some handy reports like that you can generate as well. There's also going to be scheduled task reports that you can use to pull out everything that's getting done for this week on the job or across several jobs. Status reports so that you can see what's in progress versus what's being held up. And some additional reports here as well, like list notes reports, which will pull out all those task notes if you guys want to hand those off. Now there's a couple of other reports that I've mentioned as well, like the cash flow report. And these cash flow and the earned value reports are some of those reports that require you to sync up your information between the schedule and the estimate, or require that you build your schedule from the estimate in ConstructionSuite, because we need to get these figures in here, the dollar amounts that are going to be attributed to each of the tasks that we're working on. The reason these are so important is when you generate a cash flow report, it's going to ask you for a breakdown of time for the report. Do you want to do a weekly report, a bi-weekly report, a monthly report, or what have you? Do you want to run the report for a specific time frame? And how do you want to schedule the information, or how do you want to organize it? when you click OK, it's going to spit this out for me in a spreadsheet, mapping out how much money I should be spending each week, as that's the repetition that I selected for this particular project. So once again, it's going to give me the weeks up at the top, and if you scroll down to the bottom, based on the time frame that I've set up for the schedule should require, the schedule as it's set right now is going to tell me that I have to spend $270,000 the very first week that we're starting, because I haven't finished the schedule yet. But then moving forward, I've got $3,500 the next week, and then $7,300 the following week, and then $17,000 the next, and so on. Now these numbers are only representing my costs, because when I ran the report, I selected to not include markups or the company overhead margin. So this is just a purely cost-based report, or projection, rather. So this is how much that I should expect to spend next week, and the following week, and the following week, and so on. All based on the selections and the numbers and everything like that from the schedule. Earned value report does it a little bit different. Obviously with the earned value, since it's looking at how much money you should have made over a given period of time, it factors in things like percent complete, which is actually something that you can open up in another column. If you right-click on any of the column headers, this will give you the ability to open up more columns, like the task notes and the field notes. You can open up things like the resource column if you want to just plug it in directly on the task information side. We were just referring to a couple of the different options as well. But again, this just allows you to go through and open up more information, more columns by checking boxes on the left to open up columns on the left side. Check the boxes on the right to add additional information to the Gantt chart over on the right-hand side of the schedule. So for those of you who might be interested in hiding these totals from the Gantt chart so that you can print it off and hand it to your client, take a look through the right checkbox list and find the one next to total estimate, uncheck that box, and now you've got a cleaner list. So again, you got the details there to share without oversharing by giving your clients all their totals. Now again, that percent complete column that we just turned on is going to be available here on the task information side. And from here, it works just like any other Gantt chart scheduling system. If you finish a task, you can mark it as 100%. If you're halfway done, you can mark it as 50%. If you're kind of 3/4 of the way or 1/3 of the way, whatever you guys want to do, you can mark them all accordingly. So you can just put in 7% instead of 75. But yeah. So you'll also notice that based on the number of days of work completed from the total number of days available of work, the percent for the group as a whole is also going to be calculated based off of this. So let's compress some of these down a little. And that just helps us to go through and again navigate through the schedule and reflect on this schedule, how far along we are on a lot of these tasks. Once again, as you start to finish them up, I always recommend save often. Save early, save often, I think it is. And primary reason for that, of course, is as we're making a lot of these changes, even if we're just kind of juggling around with the tasks, it's better to have the information saved should bad weather come in and shut down the office or cut the power or anything like that. Just extra precautions, and they're always good. So we'll do that, we'll save it. You'll also notice as we save this information that the tasks are going to start to show up here on the overview for ConstructionSuite for activities, and under the calendar section we'll start to see the dates showing up there as well. Where were we going? Let me turn on the information from the calendar again. So we're setting that one to be August, end of August, beginning of September. Here's a couple of things for the booth residents, scattered in amongst all of these other tasks and projects that we're working on. But you'll start to see the information coming together there. And again, a lot of this is going to be based on our start dates, end dates, durations, and predecessors that we're setting up in the schedule. And that's going to be what helps us determine when the tasks should be actually beginning and how long they're going to be running and everything like that as well. So you'll get that information. Also, it's critically important that you set resources as you guys are going through the schedule as well. It's always great to know who's responsible for getting the work done, and the reminders that you're setting up in ConstructionSuite for these tasks are going to be keyed off of these users as well, or these resources. Same as always, you can go through the right-click menu to set additional reminders, and you'll get to those through the task information section. And those reminders are going to be how ConstructionSuite notifies all the people that are going to be involved in these tasks. So you can set them to be a day in advance, a couple of days in advance, about a week and a half in advance if you'd like. But they all have adjustable time frames too. So if you wanted to send them like 30 days in advance, you can absolutely do so. 30 days prior to the beginning of this task, this email notification will go out to Abernathy Brothers. Something like that will keep them notified. Or if you so choose, you can also come to the ConstructionSuite tab and take this schedule and publish it directly to ConstructionOnline. So for those of you guys who have your ConstructionOnline account set up, and if you have Total Care in place, which allows you to take advantage of that the SuiteLink feature, connecting ConstructionSuite to ConstructionOnline, bridging that gap allows you to publish things like schedules, estimates, contracts, proposals, reports, everything like that, and share them with anybody in the project. And this is one of the easy ways to take the information and the work that you guys are doing here and make it available up in the cloud for anybody who needs to access it. So definitely make use of this one as well if you can. And don't forget that the option is going to be here under the ConstructionSuite tab to save and publish to ConstructionOnline. But again, it's important to know that as you guys are going through and you're working with the schedule here in ConstructionSuite, this is really where you're going to be doing a lot of your setup work, creating the content for the Gantt chart, assigning all of the responsibilities for them as well. Once the schedule is finished, that's when you should publish it to ConstructionOnline and not before. And then as you start to make live updates to that schedule, go ahead and make those updates on ConstructionOnline as well. And that way everybody who's actually using your portals, your ClientLink and your TeamLink portals, will be able to see these changes much faster rather than finding out through the notification system a few days before the tasks. So you're just giving everybody the opportunity there to get in and see what's going on, especially since both systems can handle these reminders and the messages going out as well. So keep an eye on those too once you guys get that information set up. Now let's see, we've covered setting up groups and tasks. We've covered setting up some of the resources. We've talked about sending out reminders and everything. So let's take a look now at what happens if you have to make adjustments to one of these schedules. Let's say we save the schedule, it's the primary schedule, we close it down, we come back in a few days later and realize that we've hit a small snag and we have to delay one of the tasks. So in this case, we can open up the schedule again. Just click on it here from the project overview. And the first step that you should always do when making changes to one of your schedules in ConstructionSuite is to come up to the Project tab and to create a baseline for the schedule at this point. Baseline is basically going to be your snapshot in time. And when you're creating this baseline, you're setting it up to reflect anything that may have caused delays to your schedule so that you can report off of this at a later date. So let's say something happens and it's getting on to hurricane season in the south. So one of them shows up, comes through and makes landfall somewhere nearby. Storm causes a few days delay on one of our jobs. So in this case, we'll go in and we'll set a baseline, and I'm going to create a label that reflects the event that's causing the delays. And now I can come in and make adjustments to the tasks. I'll have to make it non-ASAP first. So task information, uncheck the ASAP box so that I can move the task around. And you'll actually see the after image for where that baseline is. The gray boxes represent where the task was originally according to that baseline. Blue box, of course, are where we are now. And with those baselines, you'll be able to flip back and forth between them. There's no limit to the number of baselines that you can create. You'll also be able to go into the Reports tab and create a baseline schedule report as well, just in case your client has any questions about what the impact on the schedule as a whole will be based on the delays that were a result of this past hurricane. So running this report will just go through and reflect delays to individual tasks throughout the entirety of the schedule, and it'll give you the small adjustments in there as well. And it'll tell you the new end date for the schedule as a whole as compared to the end date prior to the adjustments made on that baseline. And yeah, it's a really, really excellent report for reflecting any delays. I also find that a lot of clients will use these baselines in the baseline schedule report to reflect the impact of selection delays as well. Not as a means of saying I told you so or anything like that, but really just to kind of push the client to action, because every time they miss one of their deadlines, the whole schedule might get delayed at some degree as a result. The more they miss, the more the delays rack up. So keep that in mind. There are easy ways to explain away some of the happenings on the job. And again, wonderful tools for keeping everybody informed who might need to be. So don't forget, under the project menu, you can set additional baselines here. If you click on the drop down to show baselines, you can pick one to display. If you need to remove any of them, you can always go under clear baselines and select one to delete, just in case you did something a little bit off when you were creating that baseline. So again, that's going to be most of the information that we have for you guys here today for schedules. Now don't forget, as always, if you guys have additional questions or anything like that, you can always reach out to us at any given time. Just open up your ConstructionSuite software, go up to the Help menu, and take a look for the Contact Information button up here. This Contact Information button is going to give you the best phone number or email address that you guys can use based on your location. So for those of you in the United States, and if you guys need to contact our support staff, there's a phone number for you here, or you can call in to our main line as well, which is the 800 number. If you guys would like to send us an email, you can reach me here at support@uda1.com or sales or info@uda1.com as well. And of course, this is for most of our US-based users. In Canada, of course, we've got phone numbers for you guys there, which are going to be the same. We've got numbers for people in Australia, New Zealand, other international clients as well, like South Africa or the UK. And feel free to reach out to us at any time. We've got a large staff of people here too who are ready and willing to help out should you guys call in. So feel free to ask for anybody in particular, but if you guys do need me directly, because we've touched on something here in the webinar that you guys are interested in pursuing a little bit more, by all means, contact me at the same number. Just ask for Ian Schaefer or extension 210, and I'll be happy to help out. Also, just so you know, guys, we're going to be recording this webinar, or have been recording the webinar as well, so this should be available on our YouTube channel here in the near future. And don't forget, if you guys are watching from YouTube, definitely give us a thumbs up down there at the bottom of the video, as that's going to be how we measure our success on these videos as well. So take a look for those too if you guys get the chance. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the questions portion of the webinar in this case. So we're at that time. If you guys are pretty comfortable with where you sit with the scheduling webinar today, this is going to conclude our regular content. So I want to thank you guys very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure having you here. Once again, I'm Ian here with UDA Technologies. This has covered most of our information for the scheduling webinar as available through OnPlan in UDA ConstructionSuite. Thanks again for joining me today, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.